Here he is, our good friend and maybe the world's only reasonable bucknut, the one and only Mark Rogers. Check out his outstanding channel right here on YouTube. Tons of great college football information year-round, stringers, correspondence that give you a lot of great off-season information, particularly, shall we call it, valuable information as certain markets begin to open up here in the next few months. Good to see you again, Mark. How you been, brother?
Steve, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for having me again, especially in the midst of basketball season. We can still talk some football.
Oh, believe me, I'm looking not to talk about the college basketball season. This is one of the softest, most disheartening Michigan teams I've ever seen. First and foremost, I asked you how you've been. We should mention for people that maybe don't follow either one of us on Twitter or hadn't heard the news, we wanted to extend our condolences to you and your family on the passing of your mother, which I learned about following you on Twitter. And I'm a mama's boy myself, so I can completely empathize with what your family is going through. On the other hand, for those of us with faith, it's a celebration at the same time of mourning. But I definitely wanted to make sure that the audience heard the news and could issue collectively with me here on the show just condolences and prayers and well wishes for you and your family.
Thank you, Steve. You explained it perfectly. Mourning, going to miss her, of course, but there was certainly celebration yesterday as well.
Amen. So let's get into what I opened the show with. And I was just thinking to myself as I was talking about it, Mark, 2 years ago at this time, Jim Harbaugh was basically begging for a job in the NFL to get out of Ann Arbor before the posse showed up. All right. And then he was National Coach of the Year. And then he was Big Ten Coach of the Year. So here we are. And this is the second straight year that Michigan is going to return 33 of the 44 players on the two deep of a playoff team. Right now, I'm estimating about 70% of Michigan's production overall will be coming back. In terms of the offensive backfield, it's the best at Michigan I can remember in a while. J.J. McCarthy, Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum. I actually think this offensive line, Mark, is going to be more talented than the last two overall. It goes 11 deep. We've got a 5-star recruit transferring in from Stanford, Chris Sitton's younger brother, Miles. Mark, I don't think he's going to play. Not this year anyway. I mean, I think he's hitting I think he's going to be among the reserves. Defensively, a lot of the key players are coming back. Your biggest loss is Mike Morris at pass rusher, but that's been a position that pretty much the entire Harbaugh tenure, they have found that. They've put so many guys at that position in the NFL and young guys like Derek Moore, who was a big-time recruit, Braden McGregor, who played incredible in Columbus against Ohio State. And it's not like they're going to lack for players there. I mean, maybe, who's the second corner going to be, but they've got plenty of guys they've recruited there. They can go grab somebody in the portal. Maybe the biggest loss is Jake Moody at kicker, but the guy behind him, Tommy Doman, was maybe the top kicking prospect in the country a couple of years ago. The schedule kind of looks similar to last year. I don't know, man. Is it national championship or bust? Or is it at least national championship game or bust? What are your thoughts?
Steve, you spit in the eye of the national media perspective at this point last year. And Steve, I trust you. I trust the metrics. I trust your delivery on Michigan football and where you stand. So I was somewhere in the middle because I looked at David Ajabo, Aiden Hutchinson, that wrecking crew coming from both ends of the line of scrimmage at the quarterback, and just thought Daxton Hill's one of the best defensive backs we've seen in this program in quite some time. I wasn't concerned about the Hassan Haskins loss, all due respect to him because of the dynamic aspect of Donovan Edwards and, of course, Blake Corum. So the offense, I thought, was in great hands, especially with the upgrade to J.J. McCarthy. But I really thought that the defense would be, of course, good. But I really thought you lost that dynamic aspect. And I was somewhat in between you and the national perspective. Now we arrive with similar numbers, or as you put the framework to it, even a more compelling case that Michigan's going to be strong and the best team in the Big Ten and the team to beat and a national championship contender. When I look at the rivalry, And of course, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to the rivalry. Until USC comes into the league and proves otherwise, it's still about Ohio State and Michigan. You know, this rivalry is now flipped for the first time since Jim Tressel went to Ann Arbor in 2001 and guaranteed a win. Because, like a lot of folks out there, I didn't completely buy into the first win, albeit for 2 scores in dominant fashion, Big Ten championship. It all went together to a playoff. I had to see it again, and we saw it again by 3 scores this time. So it's Michigan's conference. They are the king. And so this rivalry and the conference is flipped, and Michigan's in control. You mentioned some of the NFL losses. Ronnie Bell should be noted as well. Very productive, great player, great program player. Will play in the NFL, so I shouldn't necessarily tag him a program player, but not a superior number 1 threat. Caught 62 passes last year, provides a lot in the leadership aspect. But Olu Oluwatimi, of course, I sang his praises along with everyone else throughout the season. I just thought he was just such a phenomenal addition.
I mean, he's the first Michigan player to win the Outland. Consider that how many great linemen Michigan has produced. It's, one of the linemen, linemen in college football history. We never had a guy win the Outland Trophy until he won it this past year. So that speaks to what you're talking about.
Steve, it's a bit of a side note, but this Ayabi used to be a Nomi Oki, who, of course, has all this talent, and he falls from grace and has to climb back up the mountain and get to a huge program. I'm not really understanding his decision, but that's, again, a side note.
I think it's because Biff Poggi is the guy that kind of resurrected his career and was a father figure to him and vouched for him to come to Michigan and basically said, this is my pet project. And when Biff got the head coaching job at Charlotte, I just think that there's a lot of personal loyalty there with those 2 guys. I mean, he's been a surrogate dad to that young man, I think.
Now, talking about another freakish athlete, and this is going to be exciting to see unless you wear scarlet and gray, Will Johnson, of course, just got into the rotation, just got into the field about a third into the season, and then they increased the reps, and then he really started to show us who he is. And wow, with another off season and ready to go, he could be the best Michigan defensive back since, dare I say, 1997.
Another number 2. I hear you. Yeah. I mean, this team's it's loaded, Mark. It is absolutely loaded. And we haven't even discussed really the transfer class that they brought in. That's one of the reasons why I'm not sure how much the 5-star recruit transferring in, Miles Hinton, will play. They went out and got a guy who was a finalist for the Remington Award to play center last year. This year, they're bringing in a guy who was a semifinalist for it. They're bringing in another young man that was a captain at Arizona State, started, I think, 32 games out there. The Nugent, the center I just mentioned, he was a captain at Stanford. So you can see what they're kind of doing here. Guys that are known as team guys, culture fits, they're bringing those guys in. I thought Ernest Hausman was absolutely the best defensive player on the field for Nebraska when I was at the Michigan-Nebraska game earlier this year. He's coming in. I don't know for sure that he will start. I mean, Michigan's bringing back, if Nakai Hill-Green is able to play, they're bringing back their top 6 linebackers. If Hill-Green can't play, they're bringing back their top 5. I mean, this team is friggin' loaded. It's as loaded as any Michigan team I can remember in recent memory.
Steve, my one concern for down the road, not necessarily for this upcoming season, but I think we're both fairly believers of the recruiting rankings. The recruiting has to get better to be elite.
Agreed.
On a consistent basis, unless they're just that sharp.
Well, they had this last class was below average for me. I mean, it's basically a Wisconsin, Iowa level class. And I think 2 things happened. One, the head coach went and did an interview, thought he was taking an NFL job on National Signing Day. So that essentially destroyed all your momentum in January and February coming out of the playoff. And the other thing that happened is Michigan was just very, very slow on the NIL front. Now, I believe imminently Michigan is going to be announcing a new standard on NIL, one that will reshape a lot of the country. Open collectives, open position group, essentially salaries. And I think that they'll get the NIL house in order here in time for the 24 class. But if you go look at the previous 3 classes, Mark, before this one, I absolutely believe in terms of top-level talent and culture fit, They're the best three classes Harbaugh has had and stacked together. And it's no coincidence that as a result, he's had the two best seasons he's had back to back.
Now, Steve, when you do say national championship game or bust, I remember you placing the Michigan program at a certain level back in 2019, meaning this is the Clemson, Ohio State, and you went down the levels, and where there was a precarious position for the Stanfords of the world had fallen off the wrong way. Michigan, what was going to happen with them? Well, they've answered the bell and answered the question, but maybe after three consecutive, what would be national semifinal losses, maybe the Buffalo Bills stigma sets in.
Yeah.
I don't know, though, that hurts reality as much as it does people's perspective of where the program is, and they can't get over the hump.
So a year ago, I predicted that two Big Ten teams would make the playoff. This is the final year of the 4-team field. We're going to have 12 in 2024. And I predicted both Michigan and Ohio State would make it. Do you think we could see it again? But this time it's Michigan and Penn State.
Well, I do think that Ohio State still significantly has a better roster than Penn State, but they don't have a proven trigger man. But for anyone who's ready to start piling on Ohio State and putting them away for the season and not giving them much of a shot, of course, they have a run of quarterbacks who were unproven, who have certainly met the task in C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins, and even J.T. Barrett to a certain extent. So they're going to have two potentially upper echelon quarterbacks, and odds are telling us, and with the talent around them, that one of them is going to be good enough to be an Ohio State quarterback. I think it's more about defense, and it's more about becoming a defense that can play top flight defense against upper echelon opponents, and something Jim Knowles didn't accomplish at Oklahoma State until he was ready to, hit the door at the end of his career and tenure there at Oklahoma State. So, Drew Aller's mighty impressive in the short stints that he's been on the field, and I know Penn State fans are excited, and they have reason to be. However, the Ohio State roster is still a notch above.
To that end, I went back and looked since Ohio State's 2002 national championship, so we're going back a little over 20 years. The Buckeyes have only lost more than 2 games in the regular season twice. And in both of those seasons, they were in the midst of or coming off a coaching change. So, no. It was just the interim coach here and then another year. That's it. Since 2002, that's it. That's Ohio State's has only lost more than 2 regular season games twice, and one of them was with an interim coach. That's an incredible run, Mark. That kind of speaks to what you're talking about.
Yeah. Aside from Luke Fickell's year in 2011, Ohio State's worst Big Ten record since 2004. Their worst Big Ten record, 7-1.
Mm-hmm. This is going to be interesting, though. I think Drew Aller, or is it Aller? I don't know how it's pronounced. But it's Aller. Thank you. I think he's the most important player in the Big Ten this year. Because Penn State is quietly, because the amount of guys that Michigan brought back and the amount of talent that Michigan added from the transfer portal, Penn State quietly, Joey Porter Jr. aside, brought a lot of guys back too. Penn State quietly did very well in the transfer portal too. And they already had, they think they had in 2022 and 2021, they think they had their 2 best classes stacked back to back under James Franklin, right? So you got Nick Singleton and a lot of those guys in those classes, To me, the question is Drew Aller. Is he ready? And the one thing I thought that they didn't do that Michigan did with J.J. McCarthy, we saw Drew Aller more than Kyle McCord, obviously, but we didn't see Drew Aller the way we saw J.J. McCarthy. I mean, J.J. McCarthy still played at times in big games when they were on the line. Like he had a big-time throw against Ohio State in that freshman year, for example, okay? We didn't really see Drew Aller do that very often. We didn't really see him in situations where he was under center and in needing of making a play. And I think that was a wasted opportunity for Penn State this year, in my opinion. But if he is able to play anything close to 5-star, I think you could see a situation where all three of those teams are sitting there in the top 5 or 6. All three of those teams are on the screen on the final day of the college football playoff ratings, because they list the top 6. I think you could see all three of those teams on that screen. It's just a matter of what order they're in.
Yeah, James Franklin did miss an opportunity, though, because for as much as there was criticism against Jim Harbaugh in the amount of passing in those early games with Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy trying to break him in 2021 and also 22 to a certain extent once it was locked in on J.J. The same situation, although the Jim Harbaugh brilliance and genius at the time was, and I was definitely on board, was bringing along J.J. McCarthy, giving him substantial time against the 3 Cream Puffs. And then even once they went to Madison and had not proven anything as a team at that point in 2021, giving J.J.
People forget he scored the go-ahead touchdown in that game.
Yes. Yeah. And so I just thought that was worked extremely well by Harbaugh. I thought that was one of his best coaching moves and handling of a situation. And then through the entire offseason and then into the beginning of this past season and handling the Cade McNamara situation and being able to prove that JJ's the better quarterback. I think for that year and a half, that was his best handling of any situation that I've seen as a head coach.
I agree. And I think in all the preseason magazines, I think all three of those teams will be in the top 6. I do. So I think half the top 6 will be those 3 teams in the Big Ten East. And then Georgia and another team out of the SEC, that's 5. And, I guess, we see who gets ranked, who's the 6th. There'll probably be a lot of debate about who the 6th team is, but I think half the top 6 teams and all the preseason magazines will be those 3 out of the Big Ten East. So it'll be an interesting offseason, Mark.
Yes, of course, with a 9-game conference schedule and having played 8 games against everyone else, if you do or I guess it's 7 games against everyone else, those 3 teams went 21-0 against the rest of the Big Ten, and we could see the same exact thing, and it's all going to come down to the 3 matchups against each other. Should be fascinating.
Should be. Good stuff as always, brother. Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.